Kody Epps does an about face and returns to the BYU football program. What went into it? We're talking about that. We're also talking about Quez Glover, a new addition for Mark Pope and the BYU basketball team.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen today, and thank you for making it a part of your routine. Thank you for being an everydayer to the thousands of you who check us out on a daily basis. We are proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your only daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. All right, diving right in. Crazy news. Crazy turn of events. Last 72 hours have absolutely been wild on the BYU football side of things. As you guys are all well aware at this point, Kody Epps has announced, or at least you should be aware if I'm breaking the news to you, Kody Epps is returning to the BYU football program, doing an abrupt about face 72 hours after the word leaked that he was entering the transfer portal. He made the statement that he's coming back to BYU, and I could spend probably I could probably do 3 or 4 podcasts laying out the different things I was told about all the different nuances and all the different things that went on in the background of the story. There may be other people who try to do that, but I'm just going to suffice it to say in this circumstance that Kody, I think, did some soul searching. I think other people inside the BYU football program had a similar type feeling, and they've reconvened and they've hashed out whatever needed to be hashed out, and he is back with the BYU football program. The other thing about this is that Kody is a guy that I think is ingratiated himself into BYU fan culture. Y'all know that. It felt like in some ways he was burning those bridges, and I really do think that this is a young man who realized, you know what, maybe the grass isn't isn't greener, even though some around me may be thinking that, and it may have gotten that inside his head that made him make that decision. The thing about this is, I guess I say all of that to say this. It's good to have Kody Epps back because he is going to help BYU win football games this fall. He was inarguably one of BYU's top 3 wide receivers going into this season. There's no doubt about that. Chase Roberts, Keanu Hill, and Kody Epps were going to be the lead dogs for BYU at wide receiver. And with Kody returning, I think that trio remains intact. But the best part is now Darius Lassiter has added his name to the mix, which bolsters BYU's depth at wide receiver. And also, they have issued out offers, I think, to 9-10 other guys based on the last count of the different offers that went out. Now, a lot of those offers went out in the immediate aftermath of Kody Epps' decision to go into the portal. So how many of those will be quote-unquote committable? How many of those guys will ultimately decide to pull back on their interest in BYU because of Kody Epps and Darius Lassiter? Only time will tell on that front. But I can assure you, based on the conversation I had earlier this morning with somebody inside the program, is that BYU is not slowing down on the recruiting front. They went into the transfer portal period this spring understanding they needed to bring in 2, maybe 3 wide receivers. Well, Kody Epps was part of the calculus. So if you're going by that, if Kody was originally counted as a guy who's going to stick around, that means they're still looking for 1 to 2 more guys at least. So do not expect BYU just to stand idly by and say, hey, sorry, guys, but no interest anymore. I have on fairly good authority that BYU is continuing to work on getting visit dates set up for some of these guys in the transfer portal, gauging interest from them, all the different nuances and the kind of the checklist, if you will, of what needs to happen to get guys into the program. They know they need quality depth at every position. That's one thing that BYU's endeavored to do during this transfer portal period, or the last 2 periods, is to build up Power 5 quality depth. Are they there yet? No, they're not, but they are endeavoring as best they can to do that. You're going to hear a very interesting conversation on our official Thursday edition of the podcast tomorrow This is more what I'd call an emergency podcast. But on the podcast tomorrow, I had a conversation with both Alema Pilimai and Jackson Kafusi, both recently graduated BYU football players. We talked about transfer portal. We talked about NIL. We talked about the stresses and the successes, all the different things that go into being a BYU football player. You're going to hear that conversation tomorrow. I think it will lend some insight into some of the psyche of some of these players and how they navigate what has become an increasingly more difficult arena to compete in. And I mean that because you have the transfer portal always looming out there. You have NIL and the opportunity to make money off your name, image, and likeness. You also have to compete at a high level, and BYU is going to be going into the biggest level of football they've ever gone into in the Big 12 era. They are working their tails off, speaking of this coaching staff, to get BYU to a level where they feel like they can compete on a game in and game out basis. There's a lot of people out there who really like what BYU brings on paper to the Big 12, but I think the feeling inside the program is, yes, we think our top of the line guys, our first stringers, can hang with anybody in the Big 12 conference. The problem is when we have to dip down to some of the backups and maybe even the third stringers in certain circumstances, that is where the weaknesses lie for the BYU football program. That's should be no news to anybody out there. That's kind of been a weakness of BYU's for years. Their ones annually, even going back to their WAC and Mountain West days, traditionally they could compete with Power 5 level opponents. The problem is the quality depth, and that's what BYU is going after here. I'm getting back to the original point, though. Kody Epps is now going to come back and he's going to bolster BYU's wide receiver position. I truly believe he can be the second best, potentially even the best receiver on BYU's roster. And your gauge for what that is, whether it's yards, touchdowns, how physically imposing they look, whatever you want to gauge it as, I understand that. But the good news is Kody Epps is back in the fold, and that should make you feel better as a BYU fan, because it made so little sense to me when that news started coming out. That's why I tweeted what I tweeted. I said, what the what? Because like, if you could have given me, say, Jake, there's a guy going into the portal, I'll give you 10 guesses as to who it is. They asked me Sunday afternoon before that news leaked out and said, I'll give you 10 guesses for a player that's going to go into the portal. I probably could have gone all 10 guesses with really good guesses for each reason why I picked the guy I picked, and I wouldn't have picked Kody Epps. He seems to be a BYU guy through and through. So that's why it was so shocking to see him enter his name into the transfer portal. Now, let me also acknowledge something here that I promised I would acknowledge on today's show. A few of you, and I understand you guys I welcome any and all feedback. I'm sincere in saying that, because the thing about this is the only way this podcast and the community that we've built here on Locked On Cougars to grow and thrive is to have open and honest dialogue with you guys. Now, I can't talk to you guys face to face on this podcast. I'm doing this digitally, but your guys' interactions on social media and the YouTube comments, that type of stuff is what I'm referring to. Had a great message come in from a listener, and it's Aaron. He's tweeted at me and said, Jake, I feel like your comments, I think it was referring to the Tuesday edition when I was talking about some of the reasons and some of the feeling around Kody Epps' departure. Essentially, Aaron was saying that I became a little too critical of Kody Epps and maybe some character assassination type stuff. I didn't use the term character assassination, but I'll just sum it up saying that. Now, as I thought about that, I appreciate the feedback, because Aaron is not the only one who responded with that. A number of you on our YouTube comments, our YouTube channel, had a similar type sentiment. I will apologize for that, because I think listening back to it, because I actually listened to it on my way home from my radio job, just to kind of get a sense of maybe if I felt like I came off a little too strong. I can acknowledge, I probably sounded a little too pointed and a little too, I guess, cynical / mean-spirited to a guy like Kody Epps. I can acknowledge that. But let me add some context to why I made the comments I made. As you guys well know, I've got many contacts inside the BYU football program, and to a man or woman, or to whoever, to every interaction I had regarding Kody Epps, there was a lot of anger. A lot of anger on a lot of people's parts. They were not happy that Kody had actually participated in the visit that Darius Lassiter had been on over the weekend, had some interactions with Darius, and seemingly they felt like he was conniving the entire time to turn his back on the program. There were a lot of hurt feelings, and I guess my tone from Tuesday's podcast came more from the fact that I trust these people, and I guess I kind of took a cue from the way that they were feeling about things. Now, I can assure you that obviously with the caliber of player that Kody Epps is, his decision to return to the BYU football program, with how many people were hurt by his decision, I would imagine that they had a come to Jesus meeting. They hashed it out. They sat down or got on a phone call, whatever they had to do to make sure everybody's feelings were smoothed over. And the way I understand things is they're happy to have him back in the fold. He made it very clear that he is excited to be a BYU Cougar. I think the best line in his entire statement was the fact that I've got a number of teammates who have weddings this summer, and I cannot miss out on that. This is a young man who he is a fun-loving individual. And that's just so I hope you can understand. I apologize if it came off as I was coming too strong at Kody Epps. I probably should have toned it down a little bit. I will acknowledge that. But I hope that the context I offered there, based on the conversations I had with folks, I guess I was taking more of my cue and kind of my feelings on the matter were kind of coming from that spot. So hopefully that can add some context, but at the same time, I do agree. I probably came off a little too strong on that front. And I'm not above apologizing. That's one thing about this. We all have feelings. We all are human beings. And that Kody Epps has feelings. These people inside the BYU football program have feelings. I've got feelings. The important part is at times when you make a mistake or if you come off a little too gruff or whatever it might be, you can acknowledge that mistake. And I will say, I think I came off too strong listening back to it now. But the good news is the overarching message is that Kody Epps is back with the BYU football program. And that in and of itself should be celebrated because this kid went through a whole range of emotions. You as a fan out there went through 72 hours of fan whiplash from why is this guy leaving to how could he do this to us that he potentially is coming back. There's smoke out. Jake, what are you hearing? Folks, I had an idea that he was coming back. I was told to keep an eye on it. And then 10 a.m. I'm recording this on Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock Mountain Time, 10 a.m. this morning. So 4 hours ago and change, he puts that statement out there. It's welcome news to have this young man back with BYU because he is a fantastic representative of all things that BYU is. And the other thing about this is BYU staff believed in Kody Epps when very few other people did. That I think that may also go to the point of why they were so hurt by his decision originally to go into the portal, because this was a kid who was overlooked by so many schools. Modern day, where he played high school football, is just a recruiting paradise. USC plucks the elite of the elite from modern day. Think of the great players who have been through modern day high school in its history. Kody Epps went there, stood out, was the best receiver in the country in some people's minds, but could not seemingly get a sniff from anybody. BYU staff went in there, believed in him, loved him, and said that, hey, you can come here and make an impact. And they stuck by him through the injuries he had through the first 2 years at BYU. So I think that's some of where the hurt may have come from for BYU is that we're the guys that believed in you. We're the guys that stood by you through the injuries early on in your career. We were the ones that gave you your chance. I think that is probably the chief reason why there were some hurt feelings. But getting back to the original point here, it's good to have Kody Epps back. And I think all of us, myself included, we've all learned something from this episode. Now, more good news came Wednesday afternoon with the announcement that Quez Glover is going to be a member of the BYU men's basketball program. What does he bring? Who is he? Let's talk about that as we continue on right here on Locked On Cougars. First, a word on our friends over at Built Bar. You're looking for a delicious snack, but don't want all those calories and sugar that come with your typical ones? Then you need to try the best tasting protein bars ever, and that's our friends over at Built Bar. If you're like me, you want to make healthier snack choices, Built Bar is the perfect complement for you. They're healthy and they taste amazing. That is a combo that sounds like an oxymoron, but is absolutely true. It's absolutely true, excuse me. The macros on these things are absolutely incredible. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but a whopping 17 grams of protein packed into each one of them. You will not believe how healthy it is for you versus how good it tastes. The best part is there's a myriad of different flavors out there. I've got 4 or 5 that are my personal favorites. I guarantee you guys can find some that you will enjoy as well. You can go to Built.com and place your order there and wait for it to be shipped to your house if there's a certain flavor you're looking for. But if you need your Built Bars today and you're not necessarily all that picky about your flavors, get to your local Smith's and or Sam's Club today to pick them up. They've got 4-bar packs available now at Smith's, 13-bar bulk packages available at Sam's Club. We'll have nothing more than for you guys to enjoy the greatness that is Built Bar. But once again, you can go to Built.com, and while you're there, use the promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off your order. That's LOCKEDON15 for 15% off your order, or stop by your local Smith's and or Sam's Club today to pick them up and get enjoying the best tasting protein bars, and do it with our friends at Built Bar. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, everybody. Really do appreciate all of you who are everydayers. A number of you have reached out seriously in the last 24, 48, 72 hours and have expressed how much you guys have been listening to the podcast, and it means the world to me. There are so many BYU podcasts out there, and I'm good friends with all of them. To give them help, Brigham guys, Jeff and Garrett. Obviously, Jeff's got a new venture that he's got going on with the Daily Dose with Give Him Help Brigham. Mitch Harper with what he's got going on with Cougar Tracks, a compatriot of mine at KSL Sports, obviously, speaking of Mitch. And then obviously the guys like the Hype Train podcast, Joe Wheat and the crew over there. They do great work. So I say that to say this. Thank you for carving out time. You have a lot of options when it comes to your BYU podcast of choice, and I'm sure a number of you listen to all of them, but thank you for making Locked On Cougars a part of your routine. All right. Quez Glover announced that he is committed to the BYU football program, and I'm very intrigued by this pickup because BYU's MO in the transfer portal on the hoop side of things under Mark Pope this offseason had been to go out and find guys who had a chance to grow with BYU's core. Quez Glover is not that. He is a grad transfer 1 year type guy. He is the next Rudy Williams coming into BYU. But the one thing I love about Quez Glover is he's a former Florida Gator turned Samford Bulldog. He's most recently been playing for Samford in the SoCon, the Southern Conference. A really, really intriguing player because he has one thing that I absolutely love about his game is he is a certified bucket getter. And what I mean by that is when he needs to go and find a shot, he has the ability to create it for himself, and he does it standing at a diminutive. They list him at 6 foot, 180 pounds on the ESPN website. I don't think he's that tall. I saw he was listed at 5'11", but what I love about this is despite his lack of size, he is just, like I said, a certified bucket getter. He can get you shots, get a shot off, make a play, get points when you absolutely have to have them. And that is something that BYU has been lacking in this program, at least on the roster going into this upcoming season. I thought Rudy Williams filled that role at different times last year for BYU. A little bit inconsistent. Rudy would have a fantastic game and then have a game where he's a little bit off. Quez Glover is kind of that mold of player, but I think more consistent with his ability to go and generate his own offense. That is a welcome addition to BYU because he can come in, he can run the point guard side of things, obviously take some pressure off Dallin Hall. He can set up guys like Dawson Baker, Trevin Nell, Jackson Robinson by dishing it to them out on the wing for threes. He is a guy who I think is going to be a fantastic addition, even if it is just for the 1 year in BYU system. Like I said, you look at his averages. He averaged 24.6 points per game, 24.6 minutes per game this past season, despite missing 2 months with a torn meniscus, and still averaged over 14 points, 14.7 points per game, shot nearly 38% from three, actually raising his 3-point percentage. He's done that every year he's been in college, by the way. Went from 24% to 25 to 30 to 37.8% officially with Samford this past season. Previous to that, in 2020, 2021, 2022, he played all the games for Samford that season, was all-conference first team in the SoCon, averaging 19.2 points per game. This is a dude who knows how to score the basketball. I think is going to be a welcome addition for what Mark Pope's building with this roster for BYU. Is he a guy who's going to be able to grow with BYU? No, not necessarily, because like I said, he's only got the 1 year to get it right with BYU, but what he will offer is an offensive boost I think that BYU was sorely needed coming out of the transfer portal. I love the pickup of Ali Khalifa, the Egyptian magician, in the middle of BYU's lineup. I love that Dawson Baker can be a sharpshooter and a bucket getter of his own from the wing, but you needed a point guard when he got the ball in their hands and it's getting low in the clock that can generate their own shot. That's what Quez Glover brings to BYU, and I think this is going to be fun to see him fit in with BYU. I think that this is another good pickup for Mark Pope. I got to give Mark Pope credit, by the way. He has proven his recruiting chops are not dead. Some had thought that recruiting may have passed him by and the transfer portal had done him dirty. Obviously, time will tell to see if his evaluations about these transfer portal prospects are ultimately going to pan out versus other ones that have not panned out in the past. But on paper, this might be the best transfer portal class that Mark has ever brought in since his first year at BYU when he got the guys like Jake Toolson into the program. He brought them over from UVU. It wasn't necessarily as hard of a recruiting job as this one would have been in my mind, but I think this is a great pickup. I think Quez is going to fit in at BYU and fill a much needed role on this offense. Does he start right away? That's a great question. Can he beat out Dallin Hall for the starting point guard job? We'll see. But maybe it ends up that Dallin Hall has to start and you put Quez Glover out there and Spencer Johnson becomes your super sub off the bench. The myriad of lineup opportunities that this presents now for Mark Pope is actually pretty advantageous. This is going to be, in my mind, just looking at it right now, this is going to be a far more competitive BYU basketball team going into the Big 12 as it stands right now versus what I thought 2 and 3 months ago. And any of you who listen to this podcast know how down I was on the BYU basketball program at that point. And it didn't feel like there was much hope with that group at that time. But I think with work in the offseason with the guys who are the holdovers, as well as the additions via the transfer portal, I'm feeling a little better about BYU's chances. The Big 12 is still truly a bear trap. BYU very easily could finish in the bottom half of the conference next year and actually compete quite favorably. But that just shows how good this conference truly is going to be. And BYU's got their work cut out for them to compete on a game in and game out basis. But guys like Quez Glover, they are much needed for BYU to have the success they hope to have going in to the Big 12 era. All right. Emergency edition over. That's it. We will be back tomorrow. As I said, a great conversation for those of you who are everydayers with Jackson Kafusi and Alema Pilimai. Really enjoyed getting to know both of these young men, both of them recent graduates, guys who just recently wrapped up their playing careers in a BYU football uniform. You'll hear that podcast tomorrow. But until then, thank you so much once again for making us your first listen of the day. Hope you guys are all doing fantastic wherever you might be. And I hope you guys will rejoin us again tomorrow. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast. See ya.